Hello, everybody. Anthony Crane here with Pocket Coach. And today, our experiment is around embracing the enabler practice within the Scaled Agile framework. So this is a safe one. In the Scaled Agile framework, you'll see all around these little red enablers. They have it at the story level, feature level, capability level, and epic level. A lot of people are confused what enablers are. So in this video, we're going to make that clear. I'm going to go ahead and start my 5-minute timer right now. And let's get into it. So first off, going to bring up my standard little experiment template here. So the experiment is to adopt the idea of enabler stories. The problem that they're trying to solve is actually one of another anti-pattern. Some stories take more than one sprint to deliver value. Some features more than one quarter. Some epics, are all about not delivering value, which we'll talk about in a minute. So let's start with the story. Some stories cannot be done in a single sprint. Now, that's a whole nother set of experiments we should try to get to the point where we can, but that's going to take time. In the meantime, what do we do? And if we're in an organization where we just can't, what do we do? So the enabler story was a kind of a cheat, a kind of a way to get around the fact that stories sometimes can't be done in a single sprint. So here's how it works. The hypothesis is that if we try to break the story into two stories, they won't both be of direct business value in production, right? So what happens is we break the stories, and we have another video on story splitting. You can watch that. Lots of great ways to split on value. In this case, we can't find a way to split on value. So we create two stories, one of which will enable the second story, which is the real value. So in the story splitting video, it's all about splitting on value. In this video, it's when you can't do that, an enabler story will enable you to do future value, and they are considered a risk. An enabler feature, even bigger risk, because you're going to invest a lot more money before you eventually get value. And an enabler epic, tons of risk because you're investing a lot before you get any kind of value. So enablers are high risk, and so you don't want to see too many of them, but they are a way to say, well, this story is too big, so this one's the enabler story, and it enables this real good story that'll be happening in the next sprint. Okay. So enabler stories will allow us to do work that will enable future delivery value, but because they enable a specific story, they're still tied to ultimate value, better than not being tied to value at all. Time frame 1 hour before you figure out that this is going to work for you or not. 20-minute pivot or persevere. Typical outcomes, you should see an increase in sprint stability because you now have enabler stories. Your velocity metrics are going to stabilize out versus rolling stories that are always just too big, right? Skill growth. In order to get the skill level here, you have to have written an enabler story, enabler feature, or enabler epic. And you understand what the value story is, the one that it actually enables. If you don't know, or value feature or value epic. So you have to know that this enabler, specifically what story, feature, or epic it enables. Okay. So stories enable stories, and feature enablers enable features, and so forth. My shirt today, by the way, is the Vader. Darth Vader's on the back with a big Death Star in pink. It's amazing. I got a little stormtrooper up here. All right. So let's get into it. The first thing I'm going to show you is right out of SAFe itself. If you look here, they basically, this is the only thing I wanted to show you from the article. You can read this whole article, the scaledagileFramework.com, beautiful website, beautiful process. Some people hate it. It's okay. Anyway, I love some of the experiments they have here. Here's one of them. Exploration enablers, architectural enablers, infrastructure enablers, and compliance enablers. So what they're saying here is that there are 4 major types of enablers. And so as you think through what kind of enablers you need, these are the 4, each of which should be enabling future business value, specific story kind of stuff. Okay. So I thought that was pretty interesting. The other thing I want to show you now is kind of my top thoughts on enablers, because enablers have continuously confused my friends and clients. So here are my top thoughts. So number one, it's a cheat, right? It's a cheat for teams that cannot get work into production within their time box, be that a story, for, a sprint for a story, a quarter for a feature, right? They can't get it done in time. And so it is a cheat code. All right. But it's one that once you kind of commit to it, at least you can still see what percentage of people, like in a sprint, if it's 100% enablers, that's waterfall. If it's 10% enablers, maybe that's okay, right? Then you're just building out your architecture runway. By the way, they talk about architecture runway and SAFe as well. It's a different video. The enablers are what create that. The next one, enabler stories are very much like a subtask. So this is kind of interesting. In Jira Align or Jira Cloud, they have things called subtasks, and other tools have them as well. A subtask is a task underneath a story. If you think about it, then the subtask is not of direct value, but when you build enough subtasks, you get the story of value. The thing about a subtask is it can be done in the same sprint as the story. With enablers, they're just like a subtask because you need to build it to get the value of the story, but it can't be done in that 2-week sprint. So in a way, then an enabler is just like a subtask, with the only difference being that the enabler will be done in an earlier sprint than the rest of the story. So I thought that was a pretty interesting way to look at enablers and subtasks. We're about to run out of time here, so I'm going to go ahead and extend this for another. I'm going to reset. And I doubt it'll take 5 minutes. You can see we only have 4 more bullets to go. But if you want to stick around, you can see these last 4 ideas. Otherwise, just skim them right now and you're good to go. Okay, so second 5 minutes. It's important. Enablers can really help us see the percent of velocity on enabler versus business. When you don't give teams who cannot get to production in a single sprint or in a couple, or when some teams can go to production 100 times a day, 1,000 times a day. For the teams that can't do that, that it takes some weeks or months, or that they're stuck in a release cycle, doing a percent of velocity in enabler versus real stories, business stories, value stories can really help you understand which teams are closest and which teams are closest to agile and which teams are closest to waterfall. Because with teams with very high percentage of enablers, maybe they're the ones we want to look at first on how do we improve this situation. Enabler features are even riskier than enabler stories because that's many sprints now. A feature takes multiple sprints to build. Well, now you're talking about an enabler of a business feature that takes multiple sprints. So our risks are going up. So enabler stories are way less risky, but still risky. Enabler features much more risky. And then think about an enabler epic. An enabler epic does not provide any direct business value, and yet we're going to spend, multiple quarters of time, of money, on something that may never actually provide any value at all. So all quite risky, and that's why it's great to have the container type so that we can look at that risk and think it through. Enable epics, okay, right here, most risky of all, because epics are huge investments and no direct value. So can we think of smaller bets? Can we think of smaller chunks of value and not have to have these enabler epics? Sometimes they're unavoidable. If you have to move the entire department into a new technology, that might take many, many, many months, right? It might take many, many quarters. And it's got to get done, and yet there's no direct business value. So sometimes you got no choice. Final one, syntax. So the syntax for an enabler is open to interpretation. There is no real textbook here, but you should make clear the future value it will enable. So whatever syntax you settle on, if you can make clear who is going to ultimately benefit, so that's the user, of the ultimate value, even if it's not of this particular piece of the puzzle, and if you can somehow describe the value that it will enable in the future, in other words, the story that will come next, that's a great thing to include somehow in that enabler description. So there you have it. Whether it's a story or a feature or an epic, that holds true. And those, my friends, are my top thoughts on how to write an enabler and when you might do them. So that's it for this video. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you on the next Pocket Coach video.